Yeah, I was actually really curious. You started a nonprofit at the age of 16. What exactly was that nonprofit and what was the process? Was it like your little pet project while you're in high school?
Well, so a little bit of background. My organization was called Speak Love. It was a bullying prevention community building organization. So what we did is we went into elementary schools and junior highs and we put on assemblies that focused on bullying prevention. So we talked about, what bullying is, the different types of bullying, what to do when you see people being bullied. And then we also educated our community to help support students who are being bullied and help kind of bridge the gap to help eliminate bullying. Because a lot of the time, students who are being a bully are needing some type of support that they're not receiving. And so they're lashing out in negative ways. And so I spent a good 8.5 years running that organization. And so it really started because I had a history of bullying when I was younger. And when I was in 10th grade, there was a student in my hometown who died by suicide because of bullying. And it was just really kind of like a light bulb moment for me where I was like, okay, I've made it through this like horrific event that I worked through for several years. I was really depressed. Like it was a whole process for me. And I just kind of was hit with this idea that I had a story and a voice that could impact other people, and I really wanted to make a difference in that way. And so, when I first started, I that night that I found out about that student in my hometown, I got up out of bed, I typed up this little proposal about how I wanted to go into schools, and most of the adults in my life were like, "Oh, that's so nice," but no, which was probably fed my like determination to be like, "No, we're gonna do this." And so I ended up being connected with my assistant basketball coach at the high school, and him and his basketball students were going into schools already as like their community service for the varsity basketball team. And that year they just so happened to be talking about bullying. And so he was like, maybe this is something we could collaborate with. And to make a super long story short, that collaboration grew and we decided that we were going to make it a nonprofit. And so even within my organization, we did a special form of nonprofit. So we got a fiscal sponsor. And so basically, our fiscal sponsor was a nonprofit hub, and so we were able to fall under their 501c3 free status to be able to get donations, and they handled the like legal strategic side of things, and we were able to focus really on our mission and our vision and going into schools, and we paid them just a small nominal fee for doing that type of service for us. So that was a really good experience. And it really kind of opened my eyes to what it was like being in the nonprofit realm and also just being a young leader because it was very challenging, as you might guess, being a teenager running a nonprofit organization. And people are looking at me like, who's your parent? Who's the adult around? And I'm like, no, it's just me. Hi.
Yeah, actually, I was kind of curious about this too because I know that there's a lot of like, let's say, clubs that do this. But what made you decide to go into the nonprofit route? Was it that like people were starting to give you donations, and you're like, well, I can't do that as a club, or I can't do this as an individual, and you thought like a nonprofit would make it more authentic?
Yeah, so really it's because the bigger vision was outside of my school system. So while I was running Speak Love, we had the opportunity to go to multiple schools in our surrounding area, schools out of state. I'm located in New Mexico, so we got to go to some schools in Texas and things like that. And the ultimate dream that I might pick up one day is that we would be a global organization. And so, with that kind of vision in mind, we knew that functioning as a club under our high school just wouldn't work. And in a lot of ways, we were great partners with the school system, but there was some things that wasn't necessarily how they would want us to be doing it. And so, by becoming our own nonprofit, we had the flexibility to really hold true to our mission and really um, be able to grow in the way that we wanted to. And then of course we had goals to like bring in money and buy things, we to travel and things like that. And that led us to need to be able to take in money, which in a lot of ways we couldn't do in the school. Or if we did do the process that the school had for us, it took a lot for us to be able to take money back out of those accounts. And so it just wasn't flexible enough for us to be able to run the organization well.
All right. And were you only working in nonprofits for your entire life? Did you ever work with a for-profit company?
Oh yeah, so I also work for a for-profit company now as my like regular 9 to 5 job. So I do coaching in my free time as my own personal business, and then I'm in the workforce for a for-profit organization. I actually work for a very large tech company, so um, that's really fun too.
All right. And one of the questions that I still don't know is how do you actually start a nonprofit? Is it as simple as just signing a paper and then now you have a nonprofit, or is there a process?
Yeah, so it's not as complicated as you would think. It's just a very specific process, right? So, some of the first things that you have to have before you can file, there's an actual paperwork that you file with the United States government, and within that you have to have a certain list of things like your bylaws. You have to have like your board, how it works, how it functions. Um, you have to like have like your mission statement, your vision statement saying what your organization is for, all those types of things. Once you have all of that together, you send it off to be approved. And once that's approved, then you can, there's a few other filing processes that you have to do that is made known to you. And then you can start functioning as a nonprofit organization. A lot of organizations function in a similar way as a nonprofit without the 501(c)(3) status, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but I know a lot of beginners kind of do that, and as they start something and then it turns into, oh, I think this is a nonprofit. So you have to just do you just have to do the paperwork, get the approval, to be able to start functioning as the organization. And then you get the perks of having a 501(c)(3). So you get tax deductible donations, and you know, there's lots of perks for being a nonprofit with like different corporations that you work with, being able to do even like advertising and things like that. Nonprofits get special discounts or even sometimes free publicity. So there's a lot of good reasons to become a 501(c)(3). Yeah, it's just going through the process. And like I said, that process is very easily attained. Like you can go on right now and Google how to start a nonprofit and it'll pop up the list of steps of what you do. And once you have that done, you can start functioning as it.
Okay. I actually thought it was going to be a lot more complicated.
Yeah,
Sounds
I mean,
very similar to just a normal company then.
it so what a lot of people don't realize is that a nonprofit is a business. It's
Mhm.
just a business that your profits you profits differently. So like for a for-profit business, any profits that a company gets goes, you know, to the stakeholders or to back to the employees. In a nonprofit, it just goes back into your organization. So just the funds and profits are distributed differently, but it's a business. So
Yeah, and that actually lends to another question that I had is how would you decide between a B Corp and a nonprofit? For me, whenever I think of something like a cool social cause I would go for, I am stuck between the two because a B Corp can essentially accomplish the same as a nonprofit, but the lines are really blurry there.
yeah, I think that really just depends on, I would say that really depends on the organization and like what the root um cause or desire of the founder creating it is, right? So there's a lot of organizations that have like social components, like social spin-offs of their businesses. And so that it really just depends on like, okay, where do you want your profits to go? What portion of your organization do you want to be a not for profit? Or is this whole entity going to be an organization? So I think if you're a business that just wants to do good or that just has like a cause that you'd like to donate a proceed of or something like that, then that's a good indicator that a B Corp might be a good place for you to go. If you're an organization that's really focused on a cause and your deep desire is to bring change or impact to a certain group of people or a certain thing, then that leans more nonprofit. But that's also a question that you can talk with like a CPA to say like, hey, this is kind of what I want to be doing with your profits, this is kind of what I want to be doing with the business. What is the best strategy when it comes to filling out this paperwork that makes the most sense? And a lot of times they can give you a lot of insight of like those granular things that make that decision, that impacts that decision.
That makes sense. And while you're actually creating a nonprofit or running a nonprofit, what are the typical misconceptions that are out there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think um to me, like the one that goes like right off the bat is that a lot of people I talk to is like, yeah, I'd love to do something like that, but like I don't have what it takes to be like a nonprofit founder, right? And I've like dug deeper and asked more questions, and they're like, well, like you just have to be like a really good person to be a nonprofit founder, and I'm like, that's really funny to me because like yes, I think that good people run organizations, I think good people run businesses, right? But in my opinion, for you to be a good nonprofit founder and a good nonprofit leader, you have to care so much about the work that you're doing. And a lot of the times people don't care about something that they haven't been through. So like in my personal example, I care so much about bullying and students who have been bullied and how to like eliminate bullying in communities because I was a student who was bullied. And so I have a buy-in to that mission and to that vision. And that's what made me a good leader. That's what made me determined to keep going. And that's what drove a lot of the impact that we made, is because I was so bought into the mission that no student is going to lose their life to bullying again in my community, that it made me work harder and be better. It wasn't just because I was a quote unquote good saintly person, right? And so having people start shifting the way they think about what it means to be a leader in those types of organizations, I think really would open up so many amazing organizations that could come about, because there's so many people who count themselves out because a nonprofit feels too hard. Like you were saying earlier, like they think that it's this big, crazy, whimsical process that you don't no one knows any of the answers to, like it's this elite club. And it's just as hard as starting any other business. It's just as hard as starting any other project. It's just you have to take the time to do the research, do the steps, and then it comes into being. So yeah, I think those are probably the two biggest things. Just thinking that founders are like these saintly above all people, and then thinking that it's just like an impossible thing to create a nonprofit, which is just not true.
Yeah, and actually the going off the first point, one of the things that I'm always curious about on running a nonprofit is how do you balance between making sure that the business is running well and also making sure that the mission is served well as well. Because I feel like a lot of times you're like, oh, well, we need to hire someone for social media, but at the same time, what if that money can go towards something else that can make a bigger impact, but that social media can help with outreach? Like there's many different decisions on how are you going to use these donations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that really goes into like seeing what makes the most sense in the long term. Like, and in the beginning, when you first start an organization, your budget's going to be really small. And so a lot of those positions are going to be part-time volunteer positions from people in your community, people who are kind of jumping in with this new creation with you. And so as your organization grows and you start outgrowing the capacity that those volunteers have or that those part-time people have, then you have to start looking just like with any business. Okay, we're starting to outgrow this warehouse. We need money. We have this money and it could go to this other thing that would be really, that could go to marketing. But if we put this money in marketing and then we have all these sales, but we don't have a big enough warehouse, then we have longer lead times. And so just like with any other business, you have to balance, okay, we spent these resources for this quarter on marketing. We've seen this growth. So now we're going to take care of, okay, we need the social media manager because of XYZ. And just continuing to make those business savvy decisions like you would with any other type of organization, whether it's for profit or not for profit. And then also just having a really good team around you, I think is really important to help you kind of balance those conversations. Like your board is going to be there to help support you in knowing, like, okay, yeah, as a founder, really, you're supposed to work hand in hand with your board. So, for those of you listening who don't know, a founder is usually the CEO or executive director of an organization. They're the person who runs the day to day things happening within a nonprofit. Your board is your president or the chair of the board, and they have legal responsibility for your organization. So a lot of time, a board hires a founder, except in the case of when you're starting a brand new organization, and then they might be co-created together, right? And so your board is really in charge of making sure that the founder is running the organization the way that you told the government that you're going to be running it, that the money is going where it's supposed to, that you're doing the mission and the vision that you presented, that your nonprofit functions the way that you said it was going to function, right? And they have the legal responsibility. So if for some reason, somebody misallocates funds, then they have the legal responsibility of that organization. So, as a founder, a lot of the time you want to come to your board and give them those exact scenarios, right? You're going to be like, hey, this is what's going on in the organization. We're really kind of outgrowing the capacity of this volunteer who's on our social media team. I think it's time to hire. I know that we wanted to do XYZ, but I think if we cut out X, then we can hire the social media director, and then we can pick it back up in the next quarter because of the benefits that the social media manager is going to have, or whatever the case may be. And that's kind of how you partner with them to make sure that the needs of the organization is being met, and that the mission continues to move forward, and that those decisions are ultimately furthering the mission.
That is so interesting because I never actually thought about what the board of directors does. I just thought it was like some governing thing that like we see on TV. So it
Yeah,
sounds like the CEO or the executive director is like really running it almost like the manager in some way, and then
right,
like a governing board to make sure that you're really serving the mission, almost like a
right.
judicial board of some sort.
Yeah,
Mm.
almost, because so and the board actually hires the executive director
Yeah.
in a lot of cases for like bigger organizations. So the board usually runs on completely volunteer basis. Sometimes some boards you have to donate so much money to the organization, you have to bring so many contacts to the organization. However, a specific board is set up, they have hold some type of purpose or resource that they give to the organization, but they never get anything back. So that way they're a non-biased governing of what's going on on the like actual running of the house.
Right. And with every single nonprofit, funding is always an issue. So when I was
Right.
actually at Accenture, I was consulting WWF, not on funding, not on nonprofit. It was actually on their ERP system. And grants was a huge part of what they did. So for a lot
Yeah.
of the nonprofits that you ran or worked in, like how exactly does that work? I understood that their grants were important. I didn't know how that worked out. It was just like donations versus grants. I'm assuming grants come from the government. And how many
Right.
nonprofits actually go for that, or is it just mostly like bigger or nonprofits that tend to go for the grants?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a mix. There's obviously smaller nonprofits. Sometimes they don't have the same resources that larger nonprofits do. So the grant writing process can feel like really tedious or hard for them. But they are open to any nonprofit organization that you have. And so, really, it's just having either someone on your team who is versed in that world, or having someone on your team willing to put in the work to kind of learn that lingo, um, and then applying to grants that make sense for your organization. And so, and with that, with the grants, you basically just build a proposal. You tell them, okay, here's my organization, here's what I want to do with the funds, this is the percent that's going into the community, this is the percent going into salaries, this is the percent going into maintaining our building, here's why each of those things are important, here's how we're checking metrics to make sure that the work that we're doing is actually impactful. And then you just kind of outline all of those things. And you kind of tie it up in a bow to whatever kind of grant it is, and then you submit it. And then the government will either grant you your full grant ask, or they might do a reduction, or they might say, okay, we'll give you this much for the first year, and then based off of your results, then we will give you this much the next 5 years, or whatever the case may be, right? And so, yes, that is a process, and it's in a lot of ways it's really good because since there's not a lot of people going for more niche grants, and so it sometimes it can be really easy to get those grants if you just apply for them. But again, you have to have that skill set or that person on your team that's actively looking and seeking them, right? So that's that part of it. Fundraising is the more common way to raise money in an organization, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. So when I was doing Speak Love, we would do door-to-door fundraising. We would go, um, and that worked really well in my community because my community was really entrenched in the school systems, and they were a very giving community. We had a very large foundation that was known to promote different clubs and organizations in our town. And so it made a lot of sense for us to go to business owners. And I lived in a part of the United States that was big oil rig country. So there was a lot, when oil was booming, there was a lot of extra money that they were willing to give back to the community. And so going door to door, telling them about our mission, getting them really bought into what we were doing, that made a lot of sense. We made a lot of money. One summer, just doing that alone, a couple of times a week during the 8 weeks of summer, we raised over $15,000, right? And so that's one way to do it. There's also, sometimes bigger organizations or even smaller, but a lot of times you see it with bigger organizations. They put on like a donors gala, and they throw a big party, and they raffle things. And, there's all these different ways that you can raise money. You can, that's another place that, another place that board members really come in, is that they'll either bring connections or they'll donate a certain amount of money to the organization to be on the board. And so you just kind of have to use your connections. And that's really kind of the heart of a small organization, in my opinion, is being really plugged into their community, being plugged into the people that they're serving, or the adjacent people that care about the people that they're serving. So, for example, we were helping kids who are being bullied. Obviously, they're not going to give us money, right? But their parents and their grandparents and the schools and businesses that have kids in our school system would, right? So just finding those connections and seeing how people are connected to what you're doing, and then telling a compelling story to make them want to be a part of it, is a huge piece of the fundraising side. But the only problem with that is that fundraising is finicky, right? Like you can't count on the amount of donations you're going to have every year. Whereas with something like a grant or things like that, that's money that you can count on once you're approved and accepted for that grant. So it's a lot easier to make your budget on that. And it's a lot easier to like plan for the future when you're looking at grants. In that same vein, another way that nonprofits can raise money is sometimes they can like sell a service. So a lot of people think, well, if they're a nonprofit, then how can they sell something, right? Well, it's not about. That's where we go back into this misconception that a nonprofit isn't a business, but it is. The only difference is that instead of the profits from whatever they're selling, going back to the CEO or going to the employees, it's going back into the organization. So that's another way to get more like consistent budgeting every year is if you're selling a product or a service, and then you're like giving to the community in other ways. Like I know some nonprofits that function under like a membership type of schedule. So their members pay certain dues, and then with those dues, the organization brings in training and does community outreach and stuff like that. So like those are just a few examples of like how you can be quote unquote charging as a nonprofit and then using those funds to further the mission of your organization.